Well, is Netanyahu's government in serious trouble? Well, if you watch social media, and this is why we don't have an axe to grind on this show, we try to present you with the facts. We don't come with an agenda. We're not paid by anybody. So we're not going to give you like fake facts or fake information. So if you want to understand if Netanyahu's government is in serious trouble, if you are on social media and you're following sort of any anti-Israel X accounts, they might be sharing protests in downtown Tel Aviv of thousands of people gathered protesting against Netanyahu. They'll share videos like this showing about 3,000 protesters. It's been happening pretty much like every Saturday. Yes, these are massive protests. 3,000 people in a small country is a pretty big deal, right? I mean, if this happened like in Portugal in downtown Lisbon, it'd be a pretty damn big deal. And it's happening in the center of Israel against the corrupt Netanyahu government. And I don't hold back at all. I believe that Netanyahu is a demon, and I think he's wildly corrupt. And I've known people that worked for him that left his administration that told me how corrupt he was. So that's how I feel. These people, though, are demanding an independent state commission of inquiry into the events of October 7th, 2023. But it's the nuance that gets lost when people share these types of videos, because before October 7th, these protests were not 3,000 people. They were 250,000 people calling for Netanyahu to be investigated for corruption, judicial overreach, all of it. I had friends in Tel Aviv saying they don't think that Netanyahu's going to survive. He can't survive this. Guess what? Then, of course, October 7th happens. But right now, he's trying to build a coalition inside the government. He's got about support of about 65 members. He needs, out of 120. That's a coalition. So he's already got the support. So it doesn't look like he's going anywhere. Once again, he'll be the leader. Maybe he'll be the leader of Israel through like 2030. That's what it seems like right now. So those are the facts. Might be inconvenient for some. It doesn't really matter, but these are the facts. So if you're like truly like anti-Israel, then there you go. And if you love Israel, well, there you go. I don't care either way. Right now, a new report, though, out today shows that Israel asked Qatar to increase funds transferred to Hamas in Gaza a month before October 7th. So they asked Qatar, the country they bombed and we are supposed to hate, of course. Israel asked Qatar to increase money transferred to Hamas just a month before October 7th, because all of the money that goes to Hamas that comes from Israel, of course, remember, Israel funds Hamas, funnels through Qatar and then to Hamas. And they're like, we don't know anything about it. Okay, sure. According to the Tel Aviv newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth, the Israeli government asked Qatar to increase the amount of funds it transfers to Hamas in Gaza less than a month before the October 7th attack. Netanyahu officials, according to the report, knew the money would, quote, enable Qatar to divert other Hamas funds to arms and military preparedness, and that Hamas was exploiting Qatar's assistance to civilians to reinforce its military capabilities. Oh. So put another way, Netanyahu knew the money would fund terrorism, but its leaders wanted it funneled to Hamas anyway. That's almost like the CIA funneling drugs into Venezuela, right?
Well, and also absolutely nothing makes its way into Gaza without Israel knowing about it. Nothing.
Exactly. And the most heavily monitored border in the world, but okay. It's almost like they knew an attack like the one on October 7th would be great for Benjamin Netanyahu with those 250,000 protesters on the streets of Israel. John Kiriakou is a CIA whistleblower. By the way, John exposed the famous Bush torture program during the Bush presidency, revealing that the president of the United States himself had signed off on that torture program personally. Bush DOJ investigated it, said he did nothing wrong as a whistleblower, all good, dropped the case. Obama comes in, appoints John Brennan, says go after that guy. John Brennan, the CIA, goes after the guy, charges him with espionage, tries to ruin his life. But John doesn't back down, and he knows what it's like to be in the dark belly of the beast and knows what the dark deeds of these men like Netanyahu are up to. John, great to see you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Great to see you, too. And, I'm so glad that you started things off with these stories and these videos. I want to add something. My very first overseas tour with the CIA was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And at the end of that tour, one of the State Department officers suggested to our ambassador at the time, Chaz Freeman, who went on to be a legendary figure in American foreign policy, suggested that we go to the Israelis and we say, we'll talk to the Saudis about building a port, an airport, a water desalination plant, and an electrical grid in Gaza. What do you think? So that way you guys don't have to worry about Gaza. They can be economically self-sufficient. The Saudis will pay for everything. It'll be tens of billions of dollars, but it'll give Gaza an infrastructure. The Israelis said, and this was in 1991, the Israelis said, absolutely not. Because the Israelis wanted there to be only 5 hours a day of clean water, only 4 hours a day of electricity. They want the Palestinians to have to worry about whether or not they're going to starve to death, or whether or not the machine that's keeping their premature babies alive is going to be shut off because the power goes out. They want the Palestinians to live that way. That's why Gaza looks today the way it looks.
And as David pointed out, I mean, nothing flows into Gaza without Israel knowing everything about it.
Nothing.
Money,
nothing.
Weapons, all of it. So when people seem to have like a short-term memory loss when Netanyahu famously on camera talked about funding Hamas, like how deep is that integration with the Israelis and the CIA basically propping up, arming and funding Hamas?
I don't recall there being much, if any at all, connection between the CIA and Hamas. That was an Israeli thing. It was the Israelis' bailiwick. But the Israelis were working hand in glove with Hamas. Hand in glove. Remember, Hamas was created because of the Israelis back in whatever it was, 1988 or 85 or whatever it was. And even after all these years, in the most recent election in Gaza, Hamas only got the support of 8% of Gaza Palestinians. So the Israelis don't get any sympathy from me on this issue.
When you look at Netanyahu, you look at these latest revelations on October 7th. I want to unpack that, because when you say that there was stand down orders, I was speaking to an Israeli today in Tel Aviv, and he was pretty furious, and he said, look, and I think he'd been a long time like Netanyahu supporter. He said, there's a lot that's about to come out in the next few weeks to a few months. And the military apparatus, the Netanyahu government, and what they allowed to unfold on that day. And specifically, we were talking about these young women, these young IDF soldiers, like fresh out of college, who were basically put in these outposts as cannon fodder to be killed. I mean, they knew what was coming. They knew, the Israeli government knew these young women, these young IDF soldiers in a lot of these outposts were about to be killed. So maybe we can unpack the stand down orders and what you know and what we can talk more deeply about. And then I want to talk about this latest report today on the money funneling through Qatar.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget too. I'm so glad that you brought up these demonstrations in Israel. People have forgotten that as recently as a month, 5 weeks before the October 7th attacks, there were gigantic swaths of Israeli society in the streets, to the point where the demonstrations in Tel Aviv were so huge, more than 250,000 people, that the government had to actually shut the airport, if you can imagine. Now, these were Israelis calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to resign. Remember, and many Americans have forgotten, remember that Netanyahu has multiple felony charges hanging over him. He's indicted on multiple felony charges related to corruption. Mrs. Netanyahu has been indicted on multiple felony charges related to corruption. So Benjamin Netanyahu is not terribly popular in Israel. He hasn't been terribly popular for a very long time. And if you look at Israeli elections, going back to the first time when Netanyahu was elected prime minister, he has never, ever received more than 27% of the vote. Because Israel has so many different political parties, he has to patch together a coalition of smaller parties to become prime minister. But he's not popular. He's never been popular, and he's corrupt. So what is the best way to get Israeli voters to focus on something other than the corruption of Benjamin Netanyahu? It's a war, because everybody can rally around the flag when it comes to war, and then lo and behold, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, when all else fails, you go to war, right, to distract.
That's right.
So now you see this report from Israeli press today, and of course, the Israelis are trying to deny it. Okay, is there any truth to the Israeli government in this report? Israel asked Qatar to increase funds transferred to Hamas in Gaza a month before October 7th, that it was made by Netanyahu government officials, including Netanyahu himself, knowing that this money would go to, quote unquote, fund terrorism before October 7th.
This has been out there for many, many years, and it only stands to reason. As you correctly noted at the beginning of this segment, nothing in Gaza happens without the Israelis knowing about it and approving of it. Nothing happens. This is the most fortified border in the world, maybe with the exception of North Korea and South Korea. But the Israelis don't allow anything in or out. Well, Hamas is funded somehow. You have to keep people placated somehow. And that somehow is the Israeli government transferring funds to the Qatari government, and then the Qatari government transferring the funds to Hamas. It's been like that for years. But the thing is, it's at the same time, the Israelis trying to keep the Palestinians down by not giving them quite enough food, quite enough water, quite enough medication or electricity. And then it backfired after a while.
When you look at the stand down order specifically, what do we know? I mean, obviously, we have this from IDF soldiers themselves.
Correct.
Right? And when you talk to Israelis, and I have, in fact, this morning, as I mentioned, in Tel Aviv, and quite furious about this. And it seems like they're growing more furious, as they may or may not be Netanyahu supporters. It doesn't really matter. But knowing that their government allowed these people to be hung out to dry on purpose, and they lied about it, and they've been obfuscating and trying to hide this investigation from happening. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit more? Like, what do you expect? What do you expect we might learn?
Well, as background, the Israeli government right now is the most extreme right-wing government in the history of Israel. 2 of the sitting cabinet ministers have convictions, felony convictions, for anti-Arab hate crimes. One of them is in charge of security in the West Bank. He's also the Minister of Finance. The other is the Minister for National Security. So these are 2 men who have dedicated their lives to, well, essentially to destroying Palestinians, whether Palestinian lives or villages or homes or communities or whatever, including Christian Palestinians, by the way. The situation has continued to get worse because Benjamin Netanyahu was weakened by these felony charges. And so what he did is, rather than to shore up his support on the left, which no longer exists, he's worked to shore up his support on the right. And you do that by giving positions of authority to right-wing extremists. And, I hate to even call them right-wing because, we're right-wing in many ways. And these people are just extremists. Let's do that. We'll call them just extremists. Well, like I said, what better way to unify your population than around a war? Now, a lot of people thought that the next war was going to take place in the West Bank, not in Gaza, because Gaza had been so crushed that there wasn't enough space to fight. There wasn't a way to get weapons in easily. There's not enough food. There's not enough water. Better to fight in the West Bank. But it wasn't in the West Bank. It was in Gaza. And so I think the idea was you get to completely destroy Gaza. You get to ethnically cleanse it by forcing out the people that you don't kill, because after all, the policy can't be to just kill everybody, as much as some Israeli politicians might like to do that. And then you just take the place over and resettle it. But that's not a long-term viable policy. Look at the pictures that you're showing right now. That can't be the policy. And so we've gotten to the point where Benjamin Netanyahu is fresh out of ideas. Now people are taking to the streets again. They're protesting his corruption again. They're asking for an early election. They're asking for a change in government. And I think it's only going to start to get worse. I'll add one other thing. I have a dear friend who is a war correspondent. He goes from war zone to war zone to war zone. He went into Gaza with the IDF on October the 8th, the day after the Hamas attack. And he told me quite pointedly that one of the things that he saw immediately was a long line of cars from the concert site all the way to the border with Gaza. And they had holes in the roofs of the cars that were created by rockets. And there were dead bodies in every single one of the cars. And he said that he mentioned to the IDF escort that he had, wait a minute, these cars have Israeli license plates. They're obviously Israelis inside, and they're all dead. The Palestinians don't have the ability to, they don't have helicopter gunships to shoot rockets through the roofs of cars and kill people inside. And he was very pointedly told that that's not the story. The story is that Hamas attacked Israel. And he was not allowed to take pictures of those cars, and he was not allowed to write about them while he was in Israel.
Wow.
But he said it's the Israelis killing their own people, which we later learned was, the Samson whatever.
The Hannibal Directive.
The Hannibal Directive. Thank you for correcting me. The Hannibal Directive. They didn't want to talk about that on October the 8th. And then all of a sudden, there's what appears to be a policy to just kill women, children, the elderly, the sick, and those that you don't kill, get them to emigrate and go somewhere else.
Well, and then actually they buried the cars afterwards, too.
And they buried the cars.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Well, and then there's also this move by Trump to try to, to pardon Netanyahu, get him pardoned in his own country. So to avoid.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up because that's in the news again today. Netanyahu is calling for this, I guess we could call it a truth commission to investigate October 7th. But Israeli law is very clear about how you form one of those commissions. The commission members are to be appointed by the president of the Israeli Supreme Court. But it's the president of the Israeli Supreme Court that was insisting that the charges for corruption be brought against Netanyahu. And so Netanyahu is proposing today an extrajudicial method by which the members of the commission are appointed. And guess what? His proposal is that he appoints 3 of the members, and then the opposition in the Knesset appoints the other 3 members, with the Supreme Court president not appointing any members. And that way they can whitewash the mistakes that Netanyahu made, or whitewash the policies that the Likud bloc came up with that led to October 7th in the first place.
John, we're going to take a break in a second, but do you think we're going to see a good investigation of October 7th? We've already heard from testimony of IDF soldiers talking about the stand down order. What you just talked about.
Not a chance. Not a chance. The Israelis are in survival mode. They'll always remain in survival mode. Benjamin Netanyahu will not go to prison. He will not be convicted of any crime. Itamar Ben-Gvir and Ismail Smotrich and all these other monsters from the Israeli government are going to get off scot-free. The fix is in. This is the way they do business.